Okay, we're back. I'm a little rusty. I think we call this Tankie Group Therapy. This is edition 30 something. It's been a while. It's been a long while, actually. I've missed you guys. We have a lot to catch up on. It's been, I guess we're not going to be able to like fully recount everything, but a lot of things have happened in the interim between the last meetings. So it's good to see you, Nora, Alex, Lara. We may have Adnan coming later, not sure yet, but and Jay was threatening to show up too, so we'll see. Maybe somebody else will. I'll actually say in the chat to people if anybody wants to come that it's an open invitation. But how are you guys doing? I know that's like a lazy introduction. Who wants to start? Lara?
Hey, put me on the spot. I'm doing okay. I'm in book writing mode. I have to hand it in August 30th, which actually has been really therapeutic because I've been thinking through all the ways that shit intrudes on our psyche and how we resist that and being caught up in refusals and kind of reading all the small and big ways that our internal world is uh again aggressed upon, violence comes in, tries to take hold. It kind of pushes me to have to stay focused myself, so that's the therapeutic part of it, but then also kind of trying to stay connected also to what's happening in the world and Lebanon, especially Palestine comrades. So happy to be here with you all.
It's also really good to see you all. Um, yeah, I don't know. I not much has changed for me internally other than just um kind of deepening my pessimism. Not in the people or the struggle or the resistance, but deepening my pessimism in terms of like you know, talks of a ceasefire, the willingness of, you know, people in power to do just one right thing. That's there's there's nothing like that happening, and seeing the just constant like unbridled violence every single day. And it is I feel like um they're, you know, it's all just children now. It's all children. And it's just this constant uh, just horror, absolute horror. uh and now they're talking about like building concentration camps, and because of course they are, because of course they would, because of course they can. um so I don't know. I think I'm just, it's like very kind of still in the steady cycle of, you know, work and trying to keep afloat, trying to check in with people. But it's a very it's a very dark, this is a dark moment that we're in.
It's great to see you guys again. And I read the interview earlier this week with Naeem Kassem where he told this story about how him and Nasrallah used to say like "I love you." They used to say that back to one another. Um, so I love you guys. We have to say that now, and you know, saying that to dear comrades. So it's shitty that we need this. I think I always come back to that. Like I think about how I was invited to be form part of this group in the beginning, and it's shitty to think about more than 600 days later like this is still something that we need. um Obviously we, us four, and those in our little tanky group and whoever's watching, I guess. It's just dark. I mean, yeah, the pessimism and struggling against the pessimism when every day you're watching videos of a child, saying goodbye to their massacred parent, or vice versa, right? A parent, like this father, the video that I saw the other day of a disabled father, like saying goodbye to his like 2 kids and like his wife, and every day, and like hundreds of times now. It's part of the routine, right? Like that Conrad line about exterminate all the brutes is like every single day, hundreds. Some of those people being killed by a so-called humanitarian organization that is like, we've talked about this, like what has happened to language. Genocides always do this to language, I guess. And we are seeing it in real time, the horrific violence, not just the horrific violence, but then the violence that then is used to portray or to mislead in terms of what's actually going on. The dynamic from, that infamous quote from a US troop in Vietnam where he said something like, we destroyed the village in order to save it. Like that kind of logic that we see every day, that kind of discourse coming from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, whatever the fuck it's called. Yeah, it's not good. It's not good for us, for me mentally, but especially from the beginning, I've said that the stories of children and the stuff that they're going through has always really hit me in a different way. Also, receiving requests via social media from people from Palestinians in Gaza, like the least, I mean, to retweet, right, to quote and share, but it's like it's easy to do for us, right? But I just think about that's all they have, in addition to, so they have the resistance that are doing just heroic shit, like stuff that movies can't capture. And then you have everyday people whose recourse is to get onto social media and to just plead with complete strangers in all parts of the world for help. It's so bleak, right? It's so bleak. Obviously, it offers an opportunity to show a minimal form of solidarity, but the fact that, again, that they even need this as a recourse is just says something about this horrific genocide that apparently people in the West are still debating whether it's a genocide or not, which is also not good. But I'm obsessed with the issue of time, and we want things to move along a certain time scale. We want the genocide to end. We want the resistance to win. We want the killings to stop. But that's not the time scale that's in operation, right? And what we're seeing is, I think we're seeing entities in decline, whether it's the United States or whether it's Israel. It's just the decline, particularly in Israel, is taking, it's happening. It's just that time scale is what's like maddening, right? Because in the meantime, the indescribable suffering that people in Gaza are going through is happening. Nora, the guest you had on an EI, I cannot remember his name now, but like he was talking about this, right? That people in the West, we're not getting very good reporting or accurate information as to this decline that's occurring within Israel, economically, politically, socially, and how in many ways that decline is what's fueling this exterminationist campaign that seems to be operating at a different level of intensity. But again, it's that question of time scale. Like it's not happening for many people fast enough. But it also, the solidarity around the world is happening as well. It's just taking its time. If you look at polls in the United States, not even just within Democratic voters, but just people in general, and their level of support that has increased for Palestinian support. There's going to be a conference in Bogota, Colombia this week that's bringing together something like 25 to 30 governments, mostly global South governments, as in an emergency conference to stop the genocide in Gaza. Global South nations, I understand why this is taking so long and why they move so slowly, but I'm like, come on, like at the very least, Colombia has cut off coal, right, to Israel for months now, and that's having an impact. And for some reason, historically, Bogota is always the site of like these world historical conferences, like in the 40s, where in the late 40s, you could say that the beginning of the Cold War begins in Latin America with a conference that led to the assassination of a Colombian leader. And there was a young Fidel Castro witnessing everything. You had the Conference of Latin American Bishops in Bogota in 1968 that's seen as this really important moment for liberation theology. Hopefully this will be another one. Bogota will have another World Historical Conference that will lead to states in the Global South finally doing something meaningful beyond just discursive, but actually materially and politically to help stop the genocide in Gaza. So yeah, like always, bouncing around between pessimism and optimism. And again, it's just a time scale issue, I think, is what determines how I'm feeling at that particular point of the day, any particular point of the day.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There's, like, we don't have any time to waste. This genocide needs to end. The perpetrators need to be brought to justice. We need to have retribution. We need to have punishment of those who are carrying out this genocide. And this all needs to happen, yesterday. But it is, yeah, but we live in in a world that doesn't move in the, with swiftness to right wrongs that are done to people under the thumb of, Western imperialism. And so how do we, what are we looking at? We're looking at the heroic resistance. We're looking at, the slow but steady, kind of buildup of axis of resistance players. We see Iran ready to defend itself against Israel and the U.S. again. We see Yemen ramping up its humanitarian intervention in the Red Sea. And we see, like Shir Hever was the guest we had on EI last week, and he was talking about the irreparable economic pitfall that Israel is in, and how this is still the steps that are needed to end that colony and end Zionism as a political project and ideology. But it is just going to take time. And I think that's something that I struggle with a lot, is like, I can see the long overview, the vision, the, waking up one day, it'll happen. One day we'll wake up and Palestine will be liberated and people will be going back to their homes, and Israeli settlers will be, on boats or, on planes back to Poland and Russia and New Jersey. But it's like, it's just, I mean, to get from this, the depths of hell that Palestinians are in right now, and Lebanese, to get from there to that moment, it's very like unsettling and upsetting, and like, I don't know what fresh hell people are going to experience before that happens. But yeah, we have to just kind of remain committed to that vision, to that liberation struggle, and to the people who are fighting it.
Yeah, that's in Arabic, like iltizam, commitment. There's also wajib, right? A duty, I think, to be able to see and not get seduced into, somehow this topography is natural or new. Like, there's so much that's actually happening. And I think that's what I focus on a lot, so that I'm trying not to allow despair to be used in a particular way inside me and through me. And that is an iltizam. That's a daily commitment to do that. And to kind of do this reality testing exercise, which I find myself doing all the time, is actually recounting everything that we're seeing, that even for those of us who've been committed to revolutionary struggle and thought and analysis, like 2 years ago, I'm going to be honest, I did not think we'd be in a world where Yemen is doing what it's doing, right? Not because I didn't believe, it just wasn't on the horizon or on my radar in this way. And I think there's something deeply important for us to actually say that while, you started, Nora, and you were just like, to have some fucking people in power do something right, like, they're not going to. It's the people who have already been fucked over, like the Yemenis. And we know what the history is that goes, we know what this looks like to us. And that's why we're willing to step in and also use the language of international law, not because we believe in it, but to point out the hypocrisy and say, if you're all saying you're in this world that's, circumscribed by international law and the rights mean something, then we're stepping in and doing what we're called upon to do when a genocide is happening. And I think the same thing is, I feel like there's something in me, it feels like there's a new level or wave of resistance that's cracked open. And we're seeing that in the empire, of course, also the anti-ICE riots and sort of resistance, as we should be, and people are making connections. And so I think that's the place I keep going back to, not at the expense of the suffering we're seeing, but to say, if Gaza cracked the world open, this is what I'm attending to, are all the iterations of that, all the textures of that we see everywhere. But that is our commitment too, is to see the spaces, like you were saying, Alex, like, on the one hand, doing respect to the people who have the boot of violence, on their necks every single day, and witnessing that and doing the very least we can do. And at the same time, seeing all the ways in which they're showing us life continues. The seduction is to be like, Gaza's gone, it's done for, everybody's, like, to project into future the history that hasn't happened yet. And I think that's part of a killing machine, that's part of Zionism, that's part of settler colonialism, is to project futures that come to live inside of us. And yet there's still something that's happening that's showing us life every single day. And yes, that's part of that is resistance that say, this is the way that I'm showing you we're actually still here. And that every day acts of regular people who refuse to be erased, who refuse to die, who refuse to leave their siblings to die, who dig people out of the rubble. That's painful, because that shows the condition that made a genocide possible to begin with, but also shows the pulse of life, that, like, that's what we're fighting for. What the fuck's the point of our revolutions and our commitments if that possibility doesn't exist with more ferocity than the possibility of everybody dying? I just have to keep holding on to that part.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that you're right. All domination depends fundamentally on foreclosing the future.
Yes.
Right. And this is why those who are the oppressors, those who are exacting domination in all its forms and guises, that's why they want to rewrite history, and that's why they want to foreclose the future, right? To do it to present the future in a very deterministic, closed off way in which domination is the only horizon. Settler colonialism is the only horizon. National liberation, resistance, revolution is something impossible. And this is why I think you're right. I love it. Like, when you talk about Gaza cracked open the world, it cracked open this world, right? It cracked open this world in which we have been told for decades that there is no other alternative. There is no other possibility, that our future is this current time of monsters, now in intensified, horrific, genocidal form. But people, I think people on the ground showing that life and existence in the most horrific of circumstances are still doing it, and still showing solidarity, still showing mutual aid, still showing love, support, still record. I mean, this is something that really the fact that they're still recording and archiving their experience in the most horrific of circumstances, why would they do that? Because the people in Gaza still believe that getting this shit out is going to change something, right? At great risk, at their great personal, physical, bodily, emotional risk, they still are archiving and researching and testifying to a genocide for the rest of the world to see, because they still believe in solidarity and internationalism, that someone is going to finally say, look, we are in solidarity with you, and we will do something to help mitigate or end the current circumstances, genocidal circumstances, not of your making, which is the other part that the oppressors do, right? That it's their fault. It's their fault. They brought this on ourselves. And we, it's that Golda Meir quote, damn you for like making us kill your children kind of shit, which is another, they foreclose the future, and they always present themselves as somehow lacking agency when it comes to waging genocide and terrorism, state terrorism. And the thing I also think about is, Nora, I also love what you said about it's going to happen. It is going to happen. Liberation is going to happen. And, something I tell my students in my revolutions class is that in many ways, this is going to sound so fucked to say, but like in many ways, that's the easy part. The hard part is the day after. But at the very least, people have the space and the ability to exercise their vision of what to do in the day after. It's a wager. Revolutions are a wager. And in that wager, if you succeed militarily, then that just opens up space, the possibility to enact whatever visions that particular society has for creating a better one, a more liberatory one. And that shit's rough. We've seen it. It's tough. It's going to require more conflict, especially since these things don't happen in a vacuum either, right? Like, it's not like Haiti won its revolution and was allowed to experiment, right? Like, and do something no, it was like attacked and has been attacked for a long time. Since today, it's still being attacked, right? For many ways, Haiti is still paying for what it did in beginning in the early 1790s and ending with their independence in the early 1800s. But they win, and that just gives them the ability, the right, the space to enact their vision for their society on their land. And I want to see that day. And hopefully that's the day that we can provide help, assistance, ideas, contribution, solidarity in a different type of way, right? And I think I think of that a lot. And I think that's one thing, at least for me personally, that I've learned since October 7th is that contrary to how gringo pollsters talk about Palestine as an issue, like, because Gaza, as you mentioned, Lara, like, Gaza cracked open the world, and we owe them everything. So this doesn't stop with them winning liberation. Our internationalism and our solidarity has to continue. And I'll stop. The last thing is about Yemen. Like, what Yemen has done doesn't happen. Like, there's such few instances in like the history of humanity where a people, a community, a national community, a government like Yemen does what they do. Like, it's like you can count them on one hand, right? Like, it's like Cuba with Angola. Like, it's not that many. It's just they're setting an example of selfless and righteous internationalism. And if that's not enough to make anybody in the West a so-called third worldist, then you're hopeless. I don't know what to use some of this weird sectarian online left language. Like, if you're not a third worldist at this point, since October 7th, you're hopeless. Like, I don't know. We don't know what to do with you. Go sign up. Go join ICE, and then we can deal with you in a certain type of way. I mean, and I think Yemen has done that, has shown us that.
It's so great to be with you. I'm so sorry
Hey,
I'm
Adnan.
late.
Welcome,
and also
Adnan.
was in
Adnan.
limbo, but I so much enjoyed listening to the part that I've heard so far. So I just feel privileged as a listener that I got a bit of a preview before this comes out. But yeah, everything you were saying about the situation in Palestine and the resilience, the capacity for continuing to resist was just so powerful, because it's really quite astonishing, I think, the resources that people have shown. I just saw a video. I mean, I'm sure that there was it's an Instagram video, and I'm sure there, was some coaching, and, it's not just a straight video. But I saw a 2-year-old Palestinian girl in Gaza making bread with some flour, and rolling it out and talking about what she was doing. And it was more than just that, like, a representation of the humanity of these people, of the fact that this is a genocide that is just murdering children, and all of those heartstrings that were pulled. But I also felt so empowered by this example of incredible resilience. This girl is a survivor. She and actually, frankly, I can't imagine any 2-year-old that I've come across that has that sort of presence, and really had the dexterity and the kind of concentration to be doing this. But it's clearly something that she has been part of with her family from day one, and it's part of the very fabric of what it means to be living. And that's the point. They're still living in every way they possibly can. And that's just so profoundly inspirational, and gives you, some hope that the struggle can last, because clearly this is a race between, whether the genocide can complete. And of course, nobody would have necessarily been able to imagine that it could last this long with no restraint, but because, and no constraints put upon Israel, but because there has been absolute impunity, they have accelerated and been emboldened to attempt to eliminate the people of Gaza. And it is a race. It is a struggle. Can the forces of resistance there in Gaza last long enough that there might be some meaningful either collapse of Israel's ability to continue the genocide, with hopefully some solidarity expressing itself globally in meaningful ways, which is why I think the whole controversy and the upsurge of resistance that we've seen, I think, happening across the West, Europe, North America, and elsewhere, with the banning and proscribing of Palestine Action, for example, it has elicited, they had to go to that level because they are not confident that there isn't enough, that resistance is too weak to actually, make material challenges and checks upon the Western war machine's fueling of the Israeli war machine. And I don't even like using those as distinctions. It's all connected and together in one war machine. So they had to go to the level of banning Palestine Action. And what they've seen is that instead there's a torrent of resistance taking place in new forms and galvanizing across the culture. And so that gives me some hope that perhaps some meaningful kind of political pressure undermining in the imperial core may be able to combine with the incredible resilience and spirit of the Palestinians and their heroic resistance in facing this genocide. Maybe that there's some possibility for an outcome that preserves and saves this people. But I think, just one thing I wanted to say is that I think, maybe they're documenting. This is something that Alex was saying about the amazing fact that they're still documenting. I think it is true that perhaps they still feel, and they take strength from knowing that there is mobilization taking place. We've heard that from them, and we have to keep doing it. We have to redouble it. This is the time to be even stronger and more serious and more committed in what we do, and also think of new approaches and tactics to increase the effectiveness of resistance. But I think it might also partly be, and this I noticed in periods where there was some kind of feeling of hopelessness because the big demonstrations that took place in European capitals and things didn't lead to manifest changes in the political realities, and that there was some sort of sense we have been abandoned by the world. The world has, not been, and frankly, I think we have failed. We have failed the Palestinian people, and they could see that the resistance had not been ramped up to the level that it needed to be. But I think that they have a sense and understanding of their place in history. This is a history-making and decisive struggle for the future of the world. They understand that. They are on the front line of a global battle for whether it will be barbarism, as we talked about one time together, that team barbarism seemed to be winning. But they understand that this is of world historical significance, and that the future of humanity is actually in the balance. They are doing their part. So those are just some of the thoughts. I missed too much of the previous part of our conversation to reflect on anything else, but that was quite a kind of a long discourse. So sorry for coming in maybe kind of all guns blazing, as it were, but you inspired me talking about the resilience of the resistance.
No, I think that's perfect, Adnan, and thank you for that. And yeah, I think that kind of speaks to this state that I find myself in, and I think this resonates in our group, where we're constantly vacillating between, like, yeah, the everything is so bleak, and there's so much. It is overwhelming, between the genocide for 21 months and, the ramping up of the most horrific violences against, in every sense of the word, like Alex, you mentioned the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and now they're building a humanitarian city. The real perversion of all of these words in order to commit a whole-scale genocide against people that is live streamed on our phones across the world, and we have no material way to make it stop at this moment, but we are also doing what we can. We are, supporting the mutual aid organizations on the ground. We are giving platforms to those, those comrades in Palestine who are live streaming it, and we owe it to them, to help document this so that there will be justice afterwards, and the perpetrators will be dealt with. And then there's what's happening here in the U.S. with the Gestapo ICE raids, and there's a video that came out yesterday of, like, children being, like, forced to walk chained, like in handcuffs and leg chains, into an ICE detention van. And we're, the U.S., keeps not building hospitals and schools, but they were able to build a alligator, whatever it's called, Alcatraz on indigenous land in Florida within like 5 days. And they're putting people there, and they're, it's the most, just barbaric time. And, so we're seeing everything happen all at once. And then we're also, still, and this is an adage that we've been talking about for 21 months, we're still living our lives and, and working and picking up our kids and, registering for conferences. And there's, I think, also a deepening of compartmentalization that's happening, trying to hold all of these things together. And I've been hearing that from friends of mine, outside of Tankie Group Therapy as well, is that there's there are, what Lara, what you say about the psychic intrusions that are constant and overwhelming, happening every moment of the day, and yet we also have to figure out how to live with all of this, and not in a conciliatory way, saying, well, this is just life now. It's genocide, it's ICE raids, it's attacks on everything that we hold dear. It's turning violent, words into violence. It's prescribing a direct action group trying to stop the genocide, and that's just kind of how it is. It's we're constantly having to struggle with, I think, remaining vigilant on all fronts, connecting all the dots in the anti-imperialist, internationalist way that we all do. And I don't know, like, to what end? Like, how do we keep making sense of all of this while not completely bottoming out? And that's something that I think is important to talk about and readdress and reassess and figure out what is working and what's not, and what we need to remain resilient and focused, without burning out and without feeling like we have to give up on something.
I think, like what Alex was saying, is it's a long struggle. And I think in the context of living in the empire, the stamina for that struggle can sort of dissipate, because there are all these ways in which you are drawn into being demobilized and depoliticized and defanged. But I think it's really important. And thinking about this, you said that everything's coming together at the same time, right? And Adnan, you said a version of this too. And I'm thinking how important it is for us in our analysis, but also just in our daily commitments, to be clear and precise and accurate, that there is no version of this world of empire and capitalism in which all of this shit was gonna hit the fan at the same time, right? That's actually really, it's not just pedantic statement or analytic. It's actually really important to keep our eyes on the ball, and to say, back to what you were saying, Adnan, if there's any failure of ours, right, it's us potentially not attuning to all the signals that, whether it's Palestinians or immigrants in this empire or Black folks or whoever it is that understands that there has always been a parallel universe in which people live that many other people don't live in. Now we're just seeing that concentrated in a particular way, where most people are like, oh shit, this could happen to me. But there's always been this simultaneous world in which, whether we want to call the subaltern or the wretched of the earth or whoever in our thinking, has always lived in that world. And I think, I just remember Muhammad Dura in 2000 being murdered on camera in Gaza, in Palestine. And like, I will never forget seeing that footage. I was in Lebanon. I was living in Lebanon and seeing that footage and seeing his father and his other brother got murdered in this genocide, right? So if there's a failure, it's for us perhaps dropping the ball and making these connections across the board and understanding that there's no way empire or settler colonialism could work differently. There's no compromises that one can make. There's no sweet talking it or softening ourselves or being less militant or becoming legible to it in a particular way that's going to massage it out of this. And if nothing else, this version of the reality we're living in creates almost like a red dot to constantly, or maybe a red triangle, to constantly be attentive to, right? That our focus cannot waver off of this structural piece, and to not sort of retract into an individualistic or just a local sort of analysis and understand, again, this is precisely this overwhelm that we feel is a result of that. It's a result because that is the endpoint of all these systems together, right? And I'm thinking, Adnan, to your point of that beautiful video that you just described to us. And it's like, of course that little girl knows that, because that's the history of refusal in the land of Palestine, from the river to the sea, from the inception of the settler state, of a willful refusal to be erased, to have one's livelihood, to have one's cultural practices, to understand that what might seem small, coming together and making bread, is actually one way to consistently connect, whether it's to ancestors or to the revolutionary struggles from before, to the previous intifadas where people were making bread for warriors. I mean, our ability to hold all of that, again, without vacating the affect, like my heart shatters 1,000,000 times a day and also expands 1,000,000 times a day in terms of the possibilities, like Alex was saying, where like it's not foreclosed what's happening.
I was listening to most of it, though. I only missed like 15 minutes, 10 minutes sorting it all out. And yeah, I mean, to go off of, I mean, something that's been on my mind for months and months now, and I've said it on this show, is that like, how do you, you know, we have this way of thinking about the world as like, oh, there's this thing called history and you live inside of it, and there are these processes within that thing and they unfold at a specific rate, a speed or whatever, and we all sort of sit outside and watch. Now, all that's been collapsed by phones and the ability to represent that violence and to like consume it as like a textual object. And I've said this before many, many times. But it's like something that I like work my mind over. And that violence that we consume on a daily basis, as you just said, like the heartbreaking violence every day, takes the principal form of like this archive of images and video and like textual statements as to like bearing witness of like what's happening. So I think at the end of the day, obviously, like bearing witness and like continuing to that is like the basic work of a show like this. And I wanted to say this at the beginning when I was going to like share my contribution of like what the goal of this is, because like I sometimes view like work online as like, oh, it's content, it's whatever. But at something at the like at where we are in history at this historical moment, like bearing witness is incredibly important, especially when we fight against this incredible, powerful, billion-dollar, maybe like multi-billion-dollar machine, info warfare machine that seeks to obliterate any memory of this, that erases it, that's keeping it from any kind of mass representation as to like what's happening, to like show what's actually happening. So yeah, that's the kind of work of this show. And again, I'll think about it like, to return to that earlier point, is that like we have this view of history and there are all these processes, but one process, one pivotal process that has touched the entire planet is this thing called settler colonialism. And we've watched for 600 days, like a very specific like articulation of it, which is to say like we've watched a stage of it. And if you believe like people like Ilan Pape, who said on the Makdisi Brothers show and other people's shows a long time ago, is that like this is the beginning of the end of the Zionist project. And he's not the only one. It's just fresh in my head because I was editing an episode he just did with the Makdisi Brothers. So it's like fresh in my brain. And one of the things that he says is that like this is an extremely long process. But I realize that like that's true, and the opposite is true, is that the accelerated nature of the Gaza Holocaust is accelerated version of an older story, right? Of ethnic cleansing, of colonial what's the word? Like colonial sort of bloodletting, sacrificial mass sacrifice. And how that what that offers to like the colonial mindset, how it works as a kind of glue, a kind of affective glue for them to be like, oh, I believe in this project. So like the Conrad line that like this is something that you like have to like bow down to and like make a sacrifice to, and like that's it. And I think the ICE raids are part of that, and the American settler colonial consciousness, that like watching people get like terrorized by these goon squads is at a bit for a certain kind of American citizenry, a section of it at least, it's sport. It's like a kind of mental sport, and it unites them in this sadistic pleasure. So like this is the Israeli Zionist American sort of overlap, and it's not, and it's true for a lot of other settler colonial countries too. So I think my own sort of like view in situating all of this 600 days, after 600 days of this like mass slaughter that we've watched live and tried to like represent to the world as to like the calamity that this represents, is that like I think that these images will keep playing out in our heads for like the rest of our lives, and we like have to keep seeing them. And to make matters worse, we're probably going to be supplanted by other equally horrible or worse images, because it feels like our imperialist demons who run our societies seem intent on expanding this sacrifice. So yeah, I mean, it's important in the midst of saying all that. I know it's a big fat bummer. I'm sure what I just said feels like a bummer sometimes. I was supposed to do this in the beginning of the episode. I'm sorry. This is all pent up and it came late. But yeah, no, it is. It is. And this is, we have to, as denizens of the West, we have to be, it's like, we have to have like a front row seat to its crimes. And like, that's our job. And we have to like stare at the movie theater from the front row seat because you bought the ticket too late and it's like full. So you have to like stare up and it's painful. But that's the only choice. That's the only choice. And I have like people in my life who are like, stop watching, you need to take a break. Like, what is this? And it's like, it's almost like a religious zeal that I have now of like waking up, collating in my head, like the fresh crimes of the day and everything else that goes with it. And this is like the task of our lives. Sorry, that was a big fat downer. Sorry, this pent up downerhood. I don't know what to say, guys. What do you fucking say?
You always have the really great downers, but and I don't have anything to really bring us up. But in fact, maybe I want to go, I don't know, even down further, because I hear those kind of confident, and they're really to bolster, confidence, to give people energy, and to stave off total despair. So I feel bad about saying this, but I find sometimes that I'm a little concerned about the inevitability kind of narrative and discussion, because that also does take out some agency and sense of action. So, oh, it is collapsing, it's going to collapse, it's the beginning of the end. Maybe it'll take a long time, but it cannot sustain itself, and it will be. And for example, I mean, wonderful analysis recently on the electronic intifada with Shir Haver, talking about the economy, the military, the tensions within that are making it unsustainable and unsupportable to continue. And we know that, of course, anybody with connections and the ability, Ashkenazi, Israeli citizens especially, that can get a second passport, and most of them already have a second passport, are going to take boats to Cyprus, or get immigration to Germany, or claim that they had Sephardic roots and get into southern Spain. And so there are, of course, all of these ways in which it's collapsing and it's failing because people are leaving the project. They know that it's unsustainable. They know they don't want to live third world lives or lives of insecurity. They want a first world haven in the middle, as the garden, surrounded by the jungle. This is Borel's kind of metaphor. But what I am concerned about, in a way, is two things. One is that some people are going to be left there, and the people who are going to be left there are the most ultra kind of conservative, apocalyptic, messianic, wedded not just to the Zionist project in a kind of general sort of way, but very specifically to this kind of greater Israel and a messianic kind of fervor, where that coordinates so well with something else. Christian Zionism. And Christian Zionism is so powerful and so pervasive and has such a massive constituency in the sense that there are more Zionists who are Christian Zionists than there are anybody else, and they are at the center of the imperial core. And that's why, in some sense, it doesn't make much sense to talk about the difference between Israel and the United States, because there's a kind of core Zionist kind of project that's part of the Christian Zionist apocalyptic imagination, their sort of commitment to it. And when you talk about, so if I'll say these, upper elite Ashkenazis leave, but then it seems that they're able to recruit the Gaza Humanitarian Association. This is, to me, a harbinger of the possible really horrific future that's going to have to be confronted, is that because you're not just facing, Israel, you're really facing the whole West, and you're facing a committed cadre of psychopathic religious fanatics from the evangelical community, who are mercenaries, like all these, like Eric Prince and people, and Blackwater. They're staffed by people from the U.S. military, many of whom are like evangelical Christians who see themselves like Hegseth, as like holy crusading warriors. They are ready to staff. They will fight some of these people. Enough of these people will kind of staff Gaza Humanitarian Association style, methods for committing the genocide, that is something that has to be really confronted. This is not just whether a particular kind of project of secular Zionist European Israel, because actually the rest of the West is being hollowed out and transformed. It isn't what people thought. People aren't having that first world life and experience. Some people are, the very elite, the 1%, but more and more, there is poverty, there is insecurity, there is, the fact that people are losing their jobs. They feel worried that they're not going to be in this AI sort of tech future. There's no place for them. There's the hollowing, even here in Canada, liberal Canada. Mark Carney is about to dramatically increase military spending. And he has said he's got to cut social services. So everybody has to get used to the idea that you must have less. Your standard of life is going down. So the point is to me, is that there is a kind of irreducible kind of core of apocalyptic, violent, genocidal violence that is available there. And that's something that's going to have to be kind of really dealt with, because I don't see it just as a matter of like the high-tech economy of Israel collapsing because more and more people leave, like, they don't want to work, in Israel for Elbit Systems. So they're going to go, take their skills to the rest of the West, and it's going to leave poor Israel like incapable of well, they will import like, Christian Zionists, maybe, to do their dirty work, to staff the military. And there is an irreducible group of people who don't have the same cosmopolitan connections to leave and get, kind of the second passports and so on. So I don't know if that's, I think we have to, that's like a more hopeless thing, but actually I think it's clarifying. It's clarifying and letting us understand that the empire is the empire. It's going to have to be defeated. And it's not just where it's defeated. That is a global process that we have to really think in those terms.
Well, to be the cliche 40-year-old something dude, my rage against the machine moment is we have to know our enemy, right? Adnan? So, I mean, I think, but in the scenario that you laid out, I have a feeling that if that were to happen, there's going to be a lot of conflict, because the Zionists tend not to like get along with one another. So it would be interesting to see like how they would kind of paper over some of those contradictions. But you're right. I think that it is an important point that there are more Christian Zionists in the world than Zionists, right? So particularly there's one in my family who my life mission is to destroy his political career, no matter how we don't have to talk about that. But yeah, I think, But part of this is history too. And Adnan, you're the one responsible for me saying that like team barbarism started in like 1492, and then you're always like, no, it started in 1095, and now I've learned that from you, right? So part of this is like a longer historical process, and this is something that Sina was talking about, right? Like I think so, you know, I guess that's a privilege of living in the so-called first world, right? That we can assume that because we live in the entrails of the belly of the beast, that we can watch history and pretend like we're not in it somehow, that like history happens for us in the form of like a Marvel movie, and we can kind of like step out of it and watch it. Where, but the way that I think in a way, at least what we see in the US, the way that people experience history hitting them in the face in the form of an imperial boomerang is like what we're witnessing right now, right? Like now they are getting confronted with some of the contradictions of US empire coming home. And it's being expanded, you know, it used to be limited, right? It used to be limited in Black inner city neighborhoods or Black communities, or in Mexican inner city communities, or on the US-Mexico border. Like the type of imperial violence that the US waged abroad was always waged inside the US against Native American communities, but it was out of sight, out of mind, kind of. It was there's a spatial aspect to it, where now the border is everywhere, like as we talked about recently, right? And it's the Palestine-Mexico border is everywhere. So that's been one of the interesting things to see how folks on the ground have been fighting against ICE, is that you see almost from the beginning, particularly with the rebellion in Paramount, in real time watching people lose fear of ICE agents. And like the type of resistance that we're witnessing shows that like there is a recognition by people who are actually resisting on the ground that ICE is an illegitimate Gestapo, Nazi, death squad, however you want to characterize it, and therefore worthy of suffering resistance. And that has happened really quickly. I mean, it surprised me, I think, that to see like what happened in Camarillo, California recently, and like folks came out of the woodwork. I mean, there's like I don't know if this is true, but I saw someone post that like some like random white person drove their Tesla into an ICE truck to prevent it from moving. Like that's incredible, right? It's symbolically incredible as well. People throwing rocks at these trucks to the point that it led Trump to make one of these crazy posts saying that he lets ICE do whatever they want, which is what they already do anyway. And we witness these horrific videos of children being chained, you know, in a coffle, kind of, which is very significant in U.S. history, right? As they're being led away into prisons and into cars. And this connects kind of like what you were saying earlier, Lara. And I'm not going to say the name of the person who wrote this because Sina will be upset, but it's a quote that the tradition of the oppressed teaches us that the state of emergency in which we live in is not the exception but the rule. And that shit now has just been generalized. Now everyone is feeling this. Now everyone is seeing that, that what we thought reality was inside the so-called West or inside the US, that's the exception. The rule was always what racialized, oppressed communities have been suffering for decades within the US and as outside of the US as victims of the US empire. And this is why it's really important to keep the red dot, as you mentioned, out of the red triangle on the issue, because one of the political impulses in the US is to say, if Kamala or Hillary had won, then we'd all be at brunch. This is not a way out. This is actually feeding dialectically this fascism machine that continues to run. It just looks different. It might operate in a different way, you know, but there's still cages. There's still murderous border patrol agents. There's still an immigration deportation machine. It just, that base doesn't require, psychoanalytically, maybe Lara can jump in, like that base doesn't necessarily require like the sick, for us, what is a sick, disgusting, inhuman gratification that they get from seeing people being chained and put into places like Alcatraz. Like there's been reports of people showing up to take pictures at Alcatraz, which is like, you know, our terror can never be too swift, right? Like we need more in reaction to that kind of stuff. Someone made the really good point about Alcatraz. Someone said that people who are going there to take pictures, their grandparents were the ones taking pictures at lynchings, which were then made into postcards or serialized photographs and were sold. There was like a whole economy. And there was also the aspect of like taking body parts of lynched Black people and then placed on like storefront windows, right? So I mean, it's a technological difference, right? Like that you've talked about for a long time, like how everything's compressed. There's a different economy of circulation, technology, et cetera. But I keep thinking about that. I'm sorry, I forgot the poster, the heroic poster's handle. But I think that's a really interesting point, right? Like there is, and that's a settler colonial thing, right? Nick would talk about, our comrade Nick Estes would talk about how white settlers would keep the bones of indigenous peoples in private collections, but then also at universities. And then, California passes a law some time ago that says, no, you can't do that. And you have certain anthropologists that used to work at San Jose State University who are mad about this to this day, who made a career on the so-called alt-right, talking, bemoaning the fact that white anthropologists cannot get their hands on indigenous bones. I think this is like a settler colonial dynamic. That's like, it's an elementary aspect perhaps of settler colonialism.
I mean, that's the infrastructure of it. And then there's a psychoaffective economy of it that continues humiliation, submission, and domination. It's not enough to suffer. You have to fully submit, and to fully submit, that ongoing humiliation and enjoy in watching that. I mean, fascists love a spectacle. That's why there's Alligator Alcatraz, right? That the spectacle of putting up the sign and doing all that is part of it, which furthers this psychoaffective economy where people can then join in, because now you're joined into a network of sadism and humiliation. It's not just, your emperor it can cut off anybody's head. It's now you get to enjoy that as well. You are part of that entity. I mean, let's not forget, in Jaffa, there is a store that sells the shit that was looted from stolen Palestinian homes, including like teddy bears and shit. And like people come in and shop in that store, and we know what that store was there for, but there is something about that like connected process, that network of fascism that people are plugging into. That's also a clue for us about the counterforce of like, what the fuck do we disrupt, right? And why I think we have to remain militantly clear on the ways in which this shit just kind of seeps in and then takes hold within us, is precisely because that network is supported and shored up juridically, politically, relationally, economically, on the government level, all that sort of stuff. And that's why we need asymmetric warfare. There's no other way around it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also reminded of the trend. That it's not a trend. It's like ingrained in this current moment of Israeli soldiers, not just looting the belongings of Palestinians in Gaza and sometimes putting them on eBay, giving them to their girlfriends. And then also looting the underwear of Palestinian women and humiliatingly like mocking, Palestinian femininity. And that actually really clarifies it. That's exactly the same as stealing the bones, the skulls, the belongings of indigenous people on this continent, and putting them either in museums or claiming them as their own. That really helps me understand that, because it's always like I've been trying to figure out why do the Israelis dress up in the clothes of the women that they have forcibly displaced or executed. We've talked about this in terms of like the just violent, perception of masculinity that settler colony, encourages kind of within itself as a disgusting, violent society. But there's something else. There is something, I think the encouragement of that type of behavior, and the belonging to the bigger structure of fascist humiliation of the indigenous people that are being conquered. And of course, misogyny ties into that at all levels. It's so rotten. It's so rotten. What do we do? Yeah, I mean, Adnan, back to your point, like the people who don't have second passports and are fanatic, all these like hilltop settler youth that have their own brigade in the Israeli army, who got their asses handed to them last week in one of the greatest ambushes of all time in Beit Hanun. Yeah, what do we, how does the world, how does society deal with that level of sick, depraved, fanatic? I mean, there are examples in history of leaders of revolution, people's revolutions who have dealt with that element in their society. I don't know. That's a very sobering and very important thing to keep thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting point. Made me think quite a bit when Lara, you were saying. I mean, Alex and I talked a little bit about the politics of sadism in the episode. In fact, it's actually out right now today, and so people can go watch that. But we didn't have, well, I'll speak for myself. I didn't have the, kind of sophisticated psychoanalytic kind of perspective or language to really think through about it, but you can see that there are very close continuities, or at least something that's connecting, that pathological, Israeli need to collect and display, as you were just saying, Nora, with, this sort of sadistic desire to commodify and to circulate the images of Alcatraz, of alligator Alcatraz. And, in any of the comments sections of somebody talking about this, you will see, as I mentioned in our, you don't want to read those, but then again, you have to read them to see that there are so many people who are saying, yeah, that's exactly what we voted for. This is what we wanted. We're getting, this politics of sadistic spectacle to consume that makes us feel that this was worth it because nothing else changes. Nothing else like, can be of benefit. You have a terrible, miserable life. You're losing your job. You have no health care. You're suffering and all that. But, like whether it's Democrats, Republicans, none of that's changing. It hasn't been changing. But this is something that is being delivered for you. This fascistic spectacle, you're getting something. So in this sick pathological way, these are connecting these fragile, kind of masculinist, where they also have to try and make themselves into the victims all the time, at the same time that they are enjoying the spectacle of persecution. So it's just this very strange and screwed up, pathological situation. But I was trying to think, because Lara said that this helps clarify or makes us think, where does the resistance have to address itself to in the face of this? And the only thing I can think that comes to me is coming back to the dignity of humanity. And that is something that I see every moment in the Palestinian resistance is demonstrating dignity. You may physically humiliate us. You may do all these things that are designed to humiliate us, but you cannot actually humiliate us because we insist upon our humanity. We are dignified people who are made, dignified by our resistance, by the fact that we will not submit. That is what is driving people crazy. That is what is driving them crazy, is they will not submit. And so we have to take that lesson and figure out the ways in which we can stand empathetically against the politics of sadism, for how can we express that humanness, that dignity, that solidarity in our politics and in our way of behaving. So I want to think about that a lot more, actually. It's given me a real kind of sense that, okay, maybe there is some way to short circuit some of this pathological circuit of fascistic sadism, all the things that you all were talking about. So I want to thank you for that, but I think maybe that's a future conversation we should really think about. Like, well, where do you target and express these things to be effective, to reinforce the sense of human dignity?
That was such a good point. Adnan, about like the fascists are so whiny. You see ICE self-represent in a certain way, but then you'll see posts about how they're suffering a 700% increase in attacks on these brave and heroic soldiers who are just trying to protect the homeless. Like, stop! I can't. Yeah, that double move is so.
Boxing.
Yeah, and then that's why they have to wear the masks. Oh, poor. They wouldn't let us mask up during the pandemic, but now these people are allowed to have masks. But the point about like submission and like ultimate submission, Lara, is really powerful. And Sina, I'll let you go. My parents are undocumented migrants, so and I have a lot of stories of them, what would happen to them when they would cross the border, or when they would be victims of a raid. And they told me that most of my family that came over to the U.S. Either went into like ranching, they were like ranch hands, or they worked at restaurants and hotels, like service industry. And there's stories of when La Migra back in the 80s, early 90s, Pinche Migra, the border patrol would do a raid on a restaurant, and they would go into the kitchen of the restaurant, and almost everyone back there is undocumented, so they would arrest them, detain them, instead of going out the back door and then loading them up to these white and light green vans. They would parade them in front of the customers. And I remember hearing that story the first time my parents told me that story. And I remember thinking as a kid, like, wow, that's so messed up, right? But now I get it, right? It's that spectacle, but it's also about just rubbing in the defeat and getting these people to fully submit to the power of the Border Patrol. And to get them to acknowledge defeat, to get them to forcibly, coercively acknowledge that they had done something wrong. And this is your final submission. But we're going to parade you in front of all the customers, handcuffed or your hands up in the air, instead of just going out the back door. I mean, so there's all sorts of like little micro efforts that throughout the history of the Border Patrol since 1924, they've done things like that. They've done things in the 70s where they were exchanging sexual favors with undocumented women. There was a whole economy about that, where in certain sectors, the Pinche Migra was doing that. So there's like a lot of stuff that we don't even know. Like, we don't really know what in these spaces of exception, that one big ass space of exception that is the U.S.-Mexico border, the accumulation of those micro instances of trying to get people to submit through humiliation and through extreme violence. Now we just see it everywhere. And then when we resist, the way they come at us is to whine and to say we need to wear masks. It's like what that does to like my attempt to make sense of this is it's not good. Sorry, Sina.
No, don't apologize. It's really good. There was just a hummingbird who just flew in here. It was crazy. I don't know if it showed up on camera. As you were talking, I was thinking about what you said in terms of the border, the work of the border, right? Like around the border. And obviously like we've been talking mostly about like the psychoaffective, let's say like sort of psychosocietal, if such thing. I don't think that's something that exists, but I just made it up. But like something at like what could be called, what unites American settler project together is that like bread and circus or whatever, of watching migrants and whatever, like undocumented people, and also in general the carceral nature of the American state. They like to see it in action. Like there's a whole culture around watching people on prisons and cops and border patrol and whatever. Like, and it's like they like mask it as like reality TV, but obviously it is this kind of like propaganda and like normalizing this insanely violent, insidious police state, which is like where we all live in together. It's just not acknowledged as in those languages. But like ultimately, like this is the evolution. America is the evolution of a certain kind of settler colonial fascination or pleasure or whatever with seeing like indigenous and racialized peoples get the boot, right? And like the spectacle around that unites them in a way nothing else does. And so that's like a prime sort of shared overlap between like American whites and like American chuds who are, which I think that where I'm going with this raises a question, which is I think about this too a lot. Like, I personally think like Zionism is like the most advanced stage of fascism. This is like a form of fascism that has surpassed all of its predecessors and its origins, right? So it has like, think about the different origins of Zionism in its like geopolitical origins, which is to say, so it's the British Empire, the French Empire, the American one, which itself is a fusion of the previous two in a sense, but like, so it's like a third generation thing. And then on top of that, the Soviet Union, the dregs of the Soviet Union, who like most of them pretended to just be Jewish when it didn't even mean anything, and they just like went and got a free place to live in the Eastern Mediterranean, and like have supplied some of the most fascistic boost to like the Zionist project has come from former Soviets. So like I was thinking about that. I was like, is that like a smaller version of like the American settler project, or is it something unique? Because I don't think Israeli Jewish society maintains any space for like racialized others. American white nationalists don't, their racism doesn't, like, I will say it doesn't, it's not harmful to their economic interests. Like they don't, I mean, it is now, let me put it this way. That's what's so interesting about the Trump thing. But like it is harnessed as part of their society. And on top of that, like the multi-ethnic nature of the United States, not just its like class nature, but the fact that you do have this large middle class comprised of racialized peoples, that like they're not, the racism of the US does not expel them from these classes the way that, say, Israeli Jewish society has, right? Like if you're a Palestinian in 1948 Palestine, like you have zero rights. You are a set third class tier citizen. Your life is like a zero ticket to nowhere. Like even if you're like an Ethiopian black Jew, you still get treated as like a second. So like their racism, I feel, is more, let's say, advanced and let's say pure. I don't know how you measure racism. Maybe the American version is more advanced because it is like, because it has developed, it's had more time to develop. And so it's realized that like racism can't operate in the same way it did, you know, in like Jim Crow, whatever, that like it's not useful to capitalism and to your otherwise power base that like keeps you in power. So like that's something that is always like the material aspects of this sadism, of this sadist character, and how it's settler colonial, but it is uniquely American. And of course there's an Israeli variant of it, which I think surpasses its American sort of like origins. I mean, I don't know. This is we're in compare and contrast territory, so maybe this is not so useful. But we'll be thinking about Zionist fascism for a long, long time. Like the contours of it, like it's not just its crimes, but like all of their various contradictions and everything that they managed to like pull off in, you know, the cultural sphere. Like this is something that will like consume me, at least, thinking about this. And I guess in some ways that is a way of thinking about the US's role in our lives, because without the US, this is like a nothing project. So it's like a two countries, one system that like we'll have to deal, or two systems, one country, that like, I don't know. It's, that was all over the place. Sorry, guys. It got me thinking though, the sadism thing.
I just wanted to say that I do think that, in fact, actually settler colonialism alone, because it has many different variations and different, manifested and was developed in different historical epochs, I think it's absolutely necessary and fundamental to the analysis of Israel and the United States. But I think what we're seeing in Israel is a harbinger of a kind of just as you're saying, is an accelerated kind of advanced, new development that combines in much the same way that the Crusader states, were a product of a, Latin West, a Christendom, that was busy excluding Jews, suppressing heretics, and making war on Muslims, right? but that the actual crusader states were where you could crystallize even further some of those features in their purest form, and kind of, it's where you could develop new kind of components and models and methods. And I think that's what we're seeing with this settler colonial state becoming a crusader genocide state for the high-tech surveillance fortress future, right? It's like the model for what could come, a vision of the future that has to be kind of using, the most advanced technology, to control and surveil and manage and defeat and destroy populations.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes the receptacle of all settler fantasies, right? Like and I think you need the Arab and the Palestinian to be able to sort of make that machinery work in that pure way. I mean, Sunaida Thobani talks about in Canada about how multiculturalism and sort of the melting pot becomes a way to displace the settler colonial process, that it actually, and in some ways the empire of the United States is similar to settler colony, where like it actually, ethno-nationalism, even though we know is at play, there's a way in which the displacement of that from consciousness is a central role in the sort of expanding of settler colonialism, because you're disappearing indigenous people and then inviting in immigrants to sort of like, this is part of the national narrative, right? Whereas in the context of the Zionist settler state from the very beginning, purity and ethno-nationalism is a centerpiece of that. And the sort of bringing in of Falashi Jews or any one of these things was purely a demographic issue. And it doesn't fucking matter. Like when you get there, you're just like, oh, just kidding. You're not white. Therefore, you don't get to partake in these privileges or anything like that. And it's apartheid from day one, of course, in terms of Palestinian, quote unquote, captive settler citizenship. So I think we see, you're right. I think there is a difference to what Sina was saying, where like we see here in the context of the settler colony of the United States, where the Proud Boys, for example, have racialized minorities as a part of that, because it's a function. I mean, Dylan Rodriguez talks about this, right? Of like, it's a function of multicultural white supremacy. That is the context of the United States. For the Zionist settler state, that was never a necessity. From the get-go, you're sort of setting up the purity test that has to do with this, which of course is like fucking bonkers when you think about what, the context of the Holocaust. I mean, this whole reworking of this is precisely what race science is based on. And so, again, there's no version of this that could have gone differently. There's no version of where we are now that we could have seen unfold differently. And to many ways, Adnan, you were saying, like, what do we do with these? Like all we're left with is a fascist. We're seeing this now. The entire world, let's face it, is pro-Palestine. What's left are the fascists and the Zionists, right? And the governments to sort of allow them to run amok. But I think, I'm not saying this because I enjoy the sadism and the violence that I see, but as somebody who was born and raised under Israeli expansionism and violence, there's a way in which I prefer this more, because there's no fucking lie that's left. Every single person that is occupying Palestine is a settler. Every single person that's occupying Palestine might as well be these vigilante settler armies. What's the difference? And before, we were always beholden to these liberal notions, like being an Arab in the world is the experience of having to sit with fucking liberals saying there's a difference between the government and the people who are trying to steal your homes, and breaking the sound barrier and bombing a fucking electricity plant a mile away from our house as I was growing up. That's the world we live in constantly. So in many ways, this unvarnished version of empire and settler colonialism, I would take that any day, because at least now I'm just like, you either see this and you get it, or you're a fucking fascist and you're on for this project. And like that, I think also allows our struggles to coalesce and condense in a very particular way, rather than getting lost in these in these ideas of like semantics and parsing out, and here's this, and there's a difference between an Israeli and an IOF soldier and all these. It's like, we've seen it. No, there isn't. Whether we want to take the polls or, who's fighting these wars or who's demolishing homes, whether in the Khalil or Jenin or anywhere else, you're all part of the same structure. And I'm just like, bring it on. Now we know.
Yeah, there is a relief in that, in having it be so honest and so clarified. And it really kind of like, yeah, those discussions that we've all, been a part of in one way or another, where, yeah, people are like, well, not all Israelis, and there are some good Israelis, there are people who are there, who are fighting, for equality, and and to really understand those kind of like qualification mechanisms as completely dishonest, and also a very Zionist tactic to prioritize the comfort of Jewish Americans or Jewish Israelis. We're mostly talking about Jewish Americans and Jewish Canadians here. Being able to separate, their the people that they know in Israel or their family members, they're not the ones doing the ethnic cleansing. No, they are settlers. It is an entire settler colony. Your aunt who lives in Haifa or Tel Aviv is a settler. And to be able to just be clear about that, to not have to tiptoe around someone's, feelings. I'm sick of it. I've said this many times now. I am so done with trying to provide comfort for people who's who are settlers, and who have family members who are settlers. Like, you have a choice. Being a Zionist is a choice. Being, people who were born in the entity and grow up with Israeli nationality can choose to leave. They can choose to disavow their passport, their citizenship. That's a process of decolonization that is a possibility for people. And just to remain clear, to remain focused, is a really big relief. This is a settler colonial issue. This is a stain on humanity, and it doesn't have to be this way.
Well, guys, it's been over an hour and a half. That seems like a good place to wrap up. Thank you all. It's been a while. We should do these more often. We'll come back soon, hopefully. Does anybody have any closing remarks or anything they want to promote? I will say something, which is like, one thing I wanted to bring up at the beginning of this, which is my friend in Gaza, Mohammed. I'm just, every day I wake up and like I check to see if like my message from the night before that didn't go through, because he was like asleep probably. I just check to see if it goes through or not. And in the morning, if it's like gone through, I was like, okay, good. Like he'll see it eventually, and he responds and stuff. But they've ordered him to evacuate again. It's like the fourth time. I'm so worried for him. So I will put another plug for his campaign, and I welcome you guys all to promote anything, and I'm happy to include it.
No, I think promoting that campaign is great, and I always give whatever I can to the Samir Project. I continue to support them however I can, and yeah, anything we can do, and we can do things. We're not paralyzed. We're not unable to connect with people there. We're not, it is still possible to help people, feed themselves and their families and get medications. And so, yeah.